Chapter 20. Dreams Reclaimed. Chaos engulfed the corridor. Sirens wailed their discordant chorus, strobes of emergency lights painting the walls in alternating red and white. Selene's illusions, laced with the erratic energy of the meltdown, flickered in and out across the gloom. Sometimes they formed solid shapes, shimmering barriers against the advancing enforcers, only to dissolve a breath later under the onslaught of disruptors. The Watchers fought desperately, covering the detainees who stumbled from their glass cells in confusion, sedation lines still dangling. Selene clung to her parents, who swayed weakly between her and Ethan. They were conscious, barely. Relief and adrenaline coursed through her veins, but so did a stab of fear. If the meltdown illusions overwhelmed her now, if she lost control of Oneiric Fusion, all could unravel in an instant. "Hold them off," Draven's voice rang out, echoing over the clatter of gunfire. He ducked behind a console, returning fire at the small squad of enforcers pushing down the corridor. Sparks flew where bullets ricocheted, each impact showering the floor with chips of tile. Beside him, Victor fired short, measured bursts, sweat glistening on his brow. Ava limped forward, mouth set in pain, and raised her arms. A wave of empathic energy washed out, dulling the enforcer's aggression momentarily. It gave the Watchers a chance to herd the dazed Dreamweavers through the corridor. Yet even as Ava's power ebbed, illusions shimmered at the edges, half-formed nightmares hungrily feeding on the fear in the air. Selene gritted her teeth, lowering her parents to lean against a fragment of broken wall. Around her, dream shapes roiled, shadows, monstrous silhouettes, flickers of ghostly figures. The meltdown illusions were intensifying, drawn to the swirl of terror and pain. She felt them coil around her mind, beckoning. "I have to focus." She breathed in, drawing on that luminous core of Oneiric Fusion. Her vision blurred with color, the meltdown illusions stuttering in confusion. If she could bend them to her will, even briefly, they might create a path to escape. Steady, she told herself, remembering every training session, failure after failure, then the triumphant moment she'd forced the meltdown sabotage. This time, the illusions wouldn't break her. "Cover me," she shouted. Ethan nodded, striding away to rejoin Draven and Victor. The Watchers redoubled their volley, pinning the enforcers behind a half-fallen security barrier. Gunfire roared in the air, but Selene forced her breathing to slow, eyes fluttering closed. She pictured the swirling illusions in the corridor as threads of color, each one a ribbon of dream stuff. She felt their jagged fear, their hunger, their chaos, and she offered them purpose. In her mind's eye, she spun the illusions into a fluid tapestry, forging a shining corridor of warped light. She poured empathy and resolve into it, smoothing the raw edges that lashed out. A hush fell, as though the meltdown illusions paused to consider her invitation. Then, with a flicker of acceptance, they coalesced into a protective archway stretching down the corridor. Selene's eyelids snapped open. The Watchers gaped as they saw the meltdown illusions knit together, forming a nearly opaque barrier that pulsed with color. Gunshots spanged off it, the impacts rippling outward in waves of prismatic light. Behind that shimmering shield, the Enforcer's disruptors flared, but for once, the illusions didn't dissolve. They held. "Move," Draven hissed, seizing the chance. One by one, Watchers and newly freed Dreamweavers darted beneath the archway, away from the lethal gauntlet of bullets and disruptors. Ava hobbled alongside them, guiding the frail detainees. The meltdown illusions hissed and crackled, their chaotic energy harnessed for a single shared goal: escape. Selene's heartbeat thundered as she kept the illusions intact, feeling them strain against the disruptors. She beckoned to Ethan, who beckoned Draven and Victor. At last, they took her parents' arms, helping them forward. Relief washed through Selene, tears stinging her eyes. In the swirl of color, she recognized fleeting glimpses of her parents' anxious expressions, bewildered but alive. The enforcers battered the illusionary barrier, curses echoing. One disruptor rod crackled with a high-pitched whine, tearing a ragged hole in the shimmering archway. Selene's breath caught. She poured more willpower into the illusions, sealing the breach just long enough for Ethan and Victor to drag the final detainee through. A bullet hissed past Selene's cheek, nearly grazing her. She recoiled, illusions flickering. Just a bit longer. She darted back, sliding out of the corridor in a crouch. Her illusions collapsed with a roar as the meltdown's wild energy rebounded, swirling in fractal patterns before exploding in a shower of sparks. The watchers and detainees stumbled into a dim side chamber, panting and bleeding, but alive. Ethan quickly barricaded the door with scraps of metal. Draven planted a final charge on the corridor's structural supports, then slammed the control switch. A muted explosion rocked the walls, sending dust and debris cascading, sealing the passage behind them. The enforcers' shouts grew distant, muffled by rubble. Silence stretched, broken only by ragged breathing and the drip of water from overhead leaks. Selene found herself slumped against a battered console, illusions dimming in her mind. She felt hollowed out, as though she'd poured half her soul into taming the meltdown for those crucial moments. But they had done it. They'd escaped the labyrinth of Annex Delta with the Dreamweavers, including her parents, in tow. As watchers checked injuries and offered the detainees sips of water, Draven slumped down near Selene. "We can't linger," he rasped, massaging a bruised rib. "But that was remarkable." She managed a faint nod, her throat tight. "I anchored the meltdown illusions. It felt like they recognized we needed them, just for that instant." Ava, pale and trembling, knelt beside them. Her empathic gift flicked across the detainees, trying to soothe their confusion. Some Dreamweavers stirred, half lucid, eyes brimming with gratitude or terror. Selene's parents remained close together, glancing around as if they could scarcely believe they were free. Selene longed to rush to them, to speak, but words refused to form. She saw tears tracking down her mother's cheeks. Slowly, shakily, Selene reached out, pressing her hand over her mother's cold fingers. Ethan hovered behind them, watchful. His eyes shone with relief. But the storm wasn't over. "They'll be on our tail soon," he warned quietly. "We need to get these people out of the city, or at least to a safer zone. The meltdown illusions might ramp up again once we move." Draven nodded, pushing to his feet with a wince. "We'll exit through the old tunnels we used to enter. If we can slip away before reinforcements arrive, we stand a chance." And so they fled, half carrying the detainees through the decaying underbelly of the city. The meltdown illusions trailed them, swirling along grimy corridors, but Selene guided the watchers in weaving the illusions into protective illusions whenever enforcers lurked near. Each time, the meltdown's chaotic shapes merged with her Oneiric Fusion, forging momentary shields or decoys that vanished once the threat passed. They surfaced in a deserted industrial district under a bleak midday sky. Rain had eased to a drizzle, puddles reflecting the watchers' bedraggled forms. The detainees blinked at the open air, some of them collapsing to their knees, overwhelmed by fresh breezes on their faces. Selene's parents clung to each other, tears in their eyes. She swallowed her own, gently taking their hands. But there was no time for a proper reunion in the wasteland of twisted steel and rubble. Draven, ever vigilant, motioned them onward, forging a path toward one of the Watchers' fallback safe houses. Tension crackled. Though they'd saved the detainees, illusions might still betray them at any turn, and the traitor's threat lingered unspoken. At last, they reached a half-collapsed warehouse on the edge of the district, the Watchers funneling inside. Crates and debris offered scant cover, but it would do for a brief respite. Once they'd settled, Watchers gently laid out blankets, offering what meager rations and first aid they had. Selene sat with her parents, finally able to speak. Their voices were hoarse and stuttering, sedation and shock tangling their words, but she gleaned enough to know they recognized her, that they'd feared she perished long ago. Tears slid freely now, mixing grief with joy. They didn't have the strength for lengthy explanations, but just seeing them awake, alive, it was more than Selene had dared hope. The Watchers gave them space, though Ethan lingered nearby, quietly ensuring no illusions harried the exhausted detainees. Draven and Ava conferred in hushed tones, planning the next steps. They had done what seemed impossible, freeing a group of forcibly assimilated Dreamweavers from the meltdown's epicenter, and they'd harnessed meltdown illusions in the process. Perhaps dreams, though battered, could yet be reclaimed. Selene pressed her mother's hand between her own, ignoring the ache in her chest. Yes, illusions had wrought terror across the city, and a traitor still threatened them. But for now, at least in this battered warehouse, they had wrested victory from the meltdown. A fresh sense of possibility glimmered amid the rubble. They had reclaimed these dreams, and maybe in time they could reclaim the entire city from the nightmare that was devouring it.